All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday. Hope everyone is doing well. You are attending Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. These are a free webinar series that we have tailored specifically for nonprofit professionals like yourselves. Today, we are focused around strengthening development operations for nonprofits, and we're going to be talking about ways to build lasting donor relationships, as well as talking about managing your database. We have the lovely Whitney Martinez here with us. This is a two-part series, so we'll start part one today, and then we will wrap things up next week for part two. Before I turn it over to her, a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and it will be shared with you afterwards. All attendees will receive a follow-up email from me. Usually it's tomorrow, Friday. It'll include the direct link to the recording as well as the slide deck and other resources we might talk about today. If you notice on your toolbar, Q&A box is available for you to use. Feel free to use that, drop in your questions at any time throughout our call today. Chat box is also available to use. I will be monitoring both, so whatever you're comfortable using. Really quickly, because I know some of you are actually new to Aparo and what we do. So Aparo, we are based in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are a nonprofit ourselves, and basically what we do is we help other nonprofits with any of their technology needs and challenges. So we offer a wide range of services to help make sure we're meeting the needs of the nonprofits. You'll notice under expert advice, you can meet one-on-one with who we call a tech therapist to talk about your technology challenges, get some coaching, get connected to resources, vendors. We also offer customized team trainings as well as longer-term, bigger projects to help find solutions specific to your nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about that, best way, go to our website at aparo.org to learn more. There is a QR code here. If you want to stay updated on our email list, this is the best way to get stay updated on our upcoming events. But if you want to also submit a request, you can go to aparo.org/nonprofits and then get started that way as well. And that is it for me. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to why you're really here. Whitney, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Yenting, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and jump right in. The hour is going to go by so quickly. If you have done this workshop with me before in another setting or through another organization, it's typically a 2-hour long workshop. And so we're going to try to truncate that into the 1-hour session today, just to make sure you all have the opportunity to take away as much information as possible. And as Yenting shared, this recording will be available after the webinar today as well. So if we, as we go through this, one of the things that, and pieces of feedback, that I've given myself and that I've also received is that lots of questions come up. I mean, lots of questions, because you're all from different types of organizations, different sizes of organizations. There are so many different components, right? Depending on what sector within the nonprofit sector you're working in or you're serving. So if you have any questions after this webinar and or if you've submitted a question or we didn't get to it, feel free to send me an email directly. Give me a couple days to get back to you, but feel free to shoot me an email, and I will do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. So welcome to Development Operations. Here's my information. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, join our email list on our website. So we're going to jump in and talk about development ops and data management. So when you think about development operations, what are some of the things that come to mind? And I want you to focus on just 3 things that come to mind, and we'll use them a little bit later in the session. At the end of this particular session, you'll learn about a few ways that you can be more effective in your development operations, some best practices, effective donor communications, which is a key part of DevOps that folks don't really pinpoint, I know I didn't when I was in the sector, and the basics of operational alignment, which is also a really critical piece of development operations. So what is it? What is development operations? If you have a couple of your words in mind, try to see if they fit into this particular definition. And simply put, it's the processes that support your functions for development revenue generation. That is what development operations is. It's really process oriented and process based. And one of the things I like to focus on when we talk about DevOps is the what. Okay, the key thing you want to focus on when it comes to that is the what. Oftentimes we think operations and we think about the people that are operating those systems or those departments or those functions that need to happen in order to make your nonprofit effective. But genuinely, it is only a focus on the what. And I'll share why I focus on the what versus the who in a little while. So we focus on the what. Within that what, we focus on how development operations needs to happen, and then we focus on when it needs to happen, not by whom just yet. So why aren't we focusing on the who just yet? Because when you do that, you fall into this trap of really tying your development operations to a person or to the current person in the role or the person that you're trying to hire. And yes, that comes at a later step, and some folks may disagree with that. But what you want to focus on is your operations in a way in which it can be institutionalized for your organization. You want to make sure no matter who's in that seat, no matter what role you're trying to fill, that the process belongs to the institution and for where the institution currently is in its life cycle. Okay, so we'll get to the who, but right now we're going to focus on the what, the how, and the when of things that need to happen to have an effective development operation system. So the three key ingredients for operational excellence are making sure that your systems are customized, again, customized to your organization, making sure that they are being deployed consistently, and also making sure that they're effective, right? You don't want to scale something that is ineffective. And we'll get a little bit into how we can evaluate and rate that effectiveness so that you are not, again, scaling something that is a mediocre process, right? We want to scale excellent processes. We want to put excellent systems and processes in place. So building a plan. So what are the basic functions we need to execute on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual basis? Now you might go out there and you submit, many of you probably have, I know I did, and find these really general templates on what needs to be done within your development department. But make sure that you are customizing it, right? Going back to that first C, customizing it to fit your mission and customizing it to fit what your team members do on a day-to-day basis. And most importantly, customizing it so that it fits the capacity of your team members as your department or organization currently is. A lot of the systems that you'll find out there are extremely robust and they have so much information, and there is no way a small nonprofit with a team of 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 people can execute those things. And there's nothing wrong with finding those templates, but really distill it down to the things that your team members and your department and your organization is able to execute consistently. That is the key here. You have to be able to consistently put out these functions. And when you don't, and we've all been there, right? When you can't do it consistently, what happens? Things get bottlenecked, right? And donors notice that. They notice that. It impacts your team, it impacts your donors, and it impacts how smoothly you could potentially be running, of course, your development department. Figure out which of the functions you need to really prioritize. Again, you get that general list of templates, or maybe you've created one yourself, but look at it and ask yourself, is this an ideal operations plan? Is it a fantasy of how we could possibly be operating? Or are there 5 things that we just cannot do without? during quarter one? Are there three things we just cannot do without during quarter two versus trying to accomplish every single possible thing on the list? What resources are needed to execute these functions effectively? Now, this is the first time in the process where you'll probably be answering a question about who, right? Because we need financial resources, we need the time resources, and we also need human resources, right, in order to execute some of these functions. But again, when we're looking at building out your operations plan, we want to stick to the what, the how, and the when before we insert who in there. So we're not ignoring who, we're just putting it to the side for now until we're able to say, this is how we need to have this process down. This is how it's done here, of course, with room for flexibility when needed. So this is a super basic table of functions that we actually created for super tiny nonprofit, 4 to 5 staff members, one development team member. ED was doing most of the fundraising, as in many small organizations, right? And this is a sample table of operational functions for their database and how to clean their database and what to remove and how to update. So take a look at that, take a picture of it if you wish. But it gives you just a really general idea of some of the things that you could include, right? And again, this is just two things. There are only two things on this chart. So if you are a larger, more complex organization, imagine the endless, right, Excel sheet that you could create. And the goal is not to be endless, but the goal here would be really to list down everything that you know needs to be done to be able to function at an optimal level for your department and organization, and then distill it down to those must-dos, those must-haves, the things that you just cannot live without. Okay? So a couple of sample thinking time questions. And I saw a few familiar names in the class here today. And so I know you're probably thinking I'm beating a dead horse, but thinking time is one of my favorite strategic tactics that I use. Even now with having my own firm, I used it when I was a nonprofit. And I still use it now. And the thinking time, although it's not registered or trademarked, is from The Road Less Stupid. And it's a book written by Keith Cunningham. I think I've listened and read to the book probably a total of 12 times now in the past year. So whether you have your own business, whether if you're running a nonprofit, whether if you're a nonprofit team member or a leader or board member, I mean, the book really gives you a really comprehensive look at what it takes to be successful in business as a whole. And nonprofits are businesses. So remember that, right? When you're out there selecting your reading for the month or for the week or books for the year, remember nonprofits are businesses. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but oftentimes we get bogged down into the idea that, oh, we're a nonprofit. We don't need an HR department. And you might not need an HR department, but you do need someone who knows what they're doing in HR, right? You do need someone who is familiar with the HR laws. You do need someone who's not going to be playing favoritism and who is biased towards certain staff members. And so make sure that you're not only paying attention to the resources out there that are just for nonprofits and that you're also embracing some resources for business operations as a whole as well. So here are some thinking time questions, and all of these are important and all of these are valid. These are questions that you need to be able to answer about your development operations. And dare I say that these are pretty basic questions. Okay, these are basic questions. These are not strategic, critical thinking questions. These are very basic questions. If someone asks you, oh, how do you use your database? Or for some of us, right? Do you even use your database? And for some of us, it's a capacity issue. For some of us, we've selected a database that is not an enabler, but rather causes bottlenecks in the organization because it's so complex. No one knows how to use it, or even worse, no one wants to use it because too much training is required, right? We have a staff of 7, we have Salesforce, we need a Salesforce administrator, We don't have the budget to pay a Salesforce administrator. So now we're using Salesforce at its most basic level, and it is a pain in the neck for everyone involved, right? Just as an example, Salesforce is amazing. I've used about 9 databases. Salesforce is great, but you have to have the proper resources, right? Time resource, capacity resource, human resource to be able to use that database for a small organization effectively. Again, that's just one example. You have to be able to answer what your stewardship process looks like. And notice that all of these questions start with how, right? They're not yes and no questions. These are how do we steward our donors? And we do a whole separate webinar, which we'll be diving into in our session next week on donor stewardship and how that does tie into operations and the importance of donor stewardship in the landscape, the small landscape of your organization, what that needs to look like for you. There's so many things out there. Don't get sidetracked by those things. Oh, you have to thank your donors 8 times a year. Well, does that work for everyone? I've been in the nonprofit, I have a consulting firm, I am a donor, and I think I'd be a little annoyed if somebody thanked me every single month. I love St. Jude, love them. But for me, it's not more of, hey, I'm annoyed, stop sending me things. It's more of take that time and spend it on your programs and spending on taking care of those kids. Because I give because my heart is there. And you want to attract some of those types of donors to your organization, of course. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have those donors. But turn it into a stewardship process that works for you, the people in your organization, and your donor base. And if you don't know where to start by asking the people who are giving. But not being able to answer the question, how are our donors stewarded, puts you in a very dangerous spot. You have to be able to answer that, and you have to be able to document it and share it, right? You have to be able to document it and share it with new team members across departments, with the marketing team. Your marketing team should understand your stewardship process just as much as your development team does. I'm going to say that again. Your marketing team should understand your donor stewardship process just as much as your development team does. Okay? So keep that in mind. And we're going to talk about organizational team alignment and how that applies to development in a while as well. The other question you really cannot do without, I think, is the very next question. How and when do we cultivate our new donors? What does that process look like? Do we go after the new donor only when the board member says, hey, you should talk to Wells Fargo? Or when we learned XYZ Museum, which kind of looks and feels like us, just got a grant from Ortho Carolina. Let's go talk to Ortho Carolina. How do we make the cultivation of donors, and we have a separate class on that as well, donor cultivation. How do we make that proactive rather than reactive? And if we're talking about securing new funding sources, well, can we also look at securing prior funding sources? Can we look in our donor database at who hasn't given in the past 5 years, or maybe it's 3 years? Again, the barometer is based on your specific organization, your specific needs, and where that comes into play in the grander scheme of operational things, right, for your mission. So again, my biggest thing with my consulting company that I share with every client is there is no one consultant out there, no one book, no one class that will give you all the answers. Okay? Take the information you're hearing today or in any other class or session, or you're reading out of a book, and think through it and distill it down to what it could mean for you. What it can mean for you, how can you apply it? Can you apply it? Maybe I'm already applying this and I just didn't tie it into part of my stewardship strategy, right? So try to figure that out on your own, but take this information, digest it, and do what works for you and your organization and your team. Okay? And of course, all the questions here are incredibly important, but I wanted to focus and highlight on those three because we often get lots of questions about those questions. So I'm going to stop here for questions before we get into the three core areas for today, which is our data management, communications, and organizational alignment. So Yenting, thank you so much for helping me manage the chat. Of course, super populated as we speak. The name of the book is The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. Thank you so much, Brad. Jackie, it's a really, really good read. The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. You got it. Thank you, Alicia. Oh, Ashley, yes, yes. The Salesforce struggle is a real struggle. And I will tell you right now, Ashley, if you email me after this session, I will send you no strings attached. I will send you our one-page database comparison guide. It'll work for you depending on how big your organization is. Ashley, how big is your org and your development team? Sandra feels the same. Yenting, I can send you the slides to share with everyone on the call today. Ashley was asking about that. Jacqueline says, on the donor side at times, some feedback we have heard is that they become a bit detached from certain organizations when they feel like their thanks is a chain email / copy and paste email. Jackie, I think that's a really good observation and feedback to share with this group on this very particular topic. And that is why the whole concept of, oh, thank your donors 8 times a year, like it becomes so robotic when you're setting up your AI tool and they're getting that email, every other month, sometimes twice a month, depending on how you set it up. Some people skip summers because donors are not as active. It becomes robotic, and it does give a ring of disingenuousness, if you will, to the stewardship process. So that is something to consider, and I'm glad you've gotten that feedback and are sharing it today. Ashley says, thank you so much. We are a small team of 4, 1 development consultant. Ashley, email me and I will send you that 1-sheeter. You do not need Salesforce. And I'm so, I don't mean to be bashing Salesforce. I think Salesforce is a very powerful tool. So if there are any Salesforce reps on the call today, my apologies. But Salesforce is an incredibly powerful tool. And I have used it in organizations that have used it poorly, but used it poorly because they didn't need Salesforce. Okay. For me, Salesforce is the yacht of non-profit databases. They really needed a tugboat. Okay. And not to say one is better than the other. It just depends on where you are in your organization's life cycle. So with the team of 4, you can relieve the burden of having to learn, even if it's the Salesforce nonprofit success pack that you're using, the free one. But it is, I think it was the CEO, Kim of Aparo. I was on a webinar with Kim and she said, yeah, but it's the success pack it's like a lost puppy. Like you don't know which way it needs to go. And so email me, Ashley, and I'll send you a couple of those resources. We use Altru. Any tips and tricks for us? So I used Altru probably about 7 years ago when I worked at a museum. I think, who asked that question? Alicia, thank you for asking that. You know what, Alicia, I think it depends on the size of your team and how robust and complex your operations are. Our Salesforce, our Altru admin, and for those who may not be familiar, so Altru is a subsidiary software and CRM of Blackbaud. And Blackbaud can be pretty complex as well. I think one of their most, I'll say one of their least complex databases, and I don't think they even sell that anymore, and it's been years, was, I don't know if eTapestry is still there, but there is, oh my goodness, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, Convio. Convio used to be a long, long time ago, and Yingting, please correct me if I'm wrong, because you're probably much more up to date on the database world than I am. But I remember Convio being an option, and this was maybe about 8 years ago. But now I find every single Blackbaud CRM to be super complex. So Alicia, again, take a look at the size of your team and how complex your operations are to see if Altru is a good fit. When I worked at the museum, I had a team of 8, and that was development and marketing. And I actually migrated, I guess this could give you your answer about how much I loved Altru. I actually migrated the team from Altru to GiveEffect. Now, GiveEffect was, I mean, it's shiny, it's pretty, to me, it was all of the things I'd wanted at that time in a database for organization of my size. And, but they also taught me something that, or a question that you should not go without asking when you are shopping for that new database. And that question is, believe it or not, okay, when my donors make a credit card, when my donors are past due or lapsed for a donation, how does your database automate communications? And let them answer that thoroughly, whatever database you choose, okay? Because what we didn't realize is, and again, this is one of those things you're like, I didn't think I had to ask that question, right? What happened with GiveEffect on our end, and they may have fixed this, again, this was 6, 7 years ago, or 7, 8 years ago, is that when donors were lapsed or they, just missed their donation, they just became inactive, the system would automatically send all of our donors, or all of our lapsed donors, and inactive donors, an email that said, we did not receive your credit card payment for this month, or whatever it was. And but the problem is not every donor gave you a credit card. So we had donors calling us, wait, how do you all have my credit card information? I've never used credit card. I mailed in a check, or actually did my, donation online or over the phone or through my bank account. And so it was such a debacle. So for whatever reason, that payment processor on GiveEffect didn't work for us. And so I led the team and remigrated our team out of GiveEffect into Neon. And the organization, from what I know, 6 or so years later, is still using Neon. And Neon has been a very promising, I hate to say turnkey because no database is truly turnkey, especially if you've never used one, but Neon was a really, really good option for the organization at that time. And they've been using it since I was there, again, several years ago. Hopefully that's helpful to you, Alicia, and others who maybe have a similar question. We have 10 free for a lifetime Salesforce license, so we're trying to maximize. I have some background knowledge. Okay, that's awesome, Ashley. That's awesome. If you have that background knowledge, I mean, that makes a world of a difference. Little green light, okay. Volunteers for numbers and communications. Our team is around 20 people. Okay. So, and what you'll see, Jackie, and again, these databases optimize themselves over time, right? You have a pretty healthy team there. What you'll see is, and not just Jackie, right? Other folks who may be growing. 20 is a pretty healthy sized team. That is not a small nonprofit in the grand scheme of things, right? And you may outgrow that, eventually. So my advice here would be, before you outgrow it, to start just scoping out a couple others before you outgrow Little Green Light. And I love Little Green Light. I mean, they're simple. And I guess in the world of turnkey databases or CRMs, Little Green Light would actually be one of them. Yes, yes, Neon. If you would like the one-pager database comparison, again, it compares, I think it's 3 to 4 small to medium-sized databases in terms of complexity. Salesforce is not a part of it for organizations who are looking to change. Leanne, can that one pager be? You know what, Leanne, that's a great idea. I can include that, and Yin King, if you could send that out to folks, that would be great for those who might need it. Great idea. Did we get through all those questions and comments? I think we did. Okay, that's awesome. I didn't think we were going to make it there for a while. And as I hypothesize it's 12:30. So let's get back to work, guys. All right, so development management. Development data management. So we talked a little bit about, I suppose, databases, right? Most folks are here for that. And just to put it out there, I just want to share, I've been connected to Aparo for a very long time. Since I came to Charlotte about 10 years ago from Miami, Florida. And they do amazing work. So I just want to put that out there. Aparo does amazing work. So development data operations. A development database or CRM is critical for operational excellence. If you are still using Excel, I recommend you do not for your next fiscal year, whenever that may be. If you're on calendar year, you have about 6 months to go. If you're not, then you have about 2.5, 3 months to go. And it's hard, right? Database transitions are hard. If you're using Excel, I would go to a smaller system like a Little Green Light. Some folks have used Network for Good, or if you want something just a little bit more robust, then you can go into Bloomerang. But I would get out of Excel because, Excel allows you to keep your information, and to an extent, you can analyze some information. But if you are doing the work that we're talking about here today, if you are stewarding your donors, if you are cultivating new donors, you are going to grow pretty fast. And you want to make sure before that growth comes, right? We want to have that abundant mindset. Before that growth comes, you want to make sure that you're prepared to transition even the little bit of data that you have, if it's a little bit, out of Excel and migrating it into even the most simple database. Okay. And we don't get into this today, but make sure that the database that you select is not what I call a mom and pop shop database, right? Make sure they are worth their salt. Make sure that they abide by all of the donor fidelity criteria so that your donor information is kept safe and that there is a high level of security on that, right? I should have mentioned this earlier. Do your research. A new pair of shiny shoes is no good if it doesn't fit. And I should have put that in quotes because that's in the book, A Road Less Stupid. Again, probably one of my favorite all-time business reads. So if you are looking for that database, that's kind of what we fell into years ago with GiveEffect. It just was not a good fit. It was very pretty, but it wasn't a good fit. So make sure you do your research. And one of the best ways to do that research and to get honest feedback is to ask whoever is doing your demo or whoever is your sales representative for other organizations that look and feel like you who use this database. Let them know you want to talk to them as a reference. And I've gotten really good feedback in that way. That's how we landed on GiveEffect, but unfortunately, that didn't work either. So Excel is optimal for analyzing your data once it's exported. So if you are using a database and you're exporting out into Excel, yes, you can do the pivot tables and you can do the comparisons. You can analyze your data down, right? I love Excel, but it's not a substitute for a CRM. Okay, it's just not. Your ability to track, on Excel, the ability to track what I call and pay attention to and nurture the donor journey or the donor life cycle. That's what you need a CRM for, right? You need a CRM that can say, okay, Alicia gave this year, she gave $100 this year. She became a millionaire the next year. So this year we got to go after her for more money. You need the CRM where you can click a button and it puts Alicia into the major ask category for next year automatically. Can you do that with Excel? Sure. You can add it, right, to a cell. There are some ways to create macros in Excel to be able to do that automatically and create that automation. There are some tools you could connect Excel to make that happen. But why go through all of that when you can just get a CRM that can manage that information for you? And not to mention the donor fidelity, the donor data security becomes an issue with Excel. As nonprofits, we get audited for our finances, but we don't get audited for data fidelity, right? We don't get audited for the integrity and the maintenance of our data and making sure we're using a high security system. So don't wait until it's too late, right? Don't wait until it's too late when the disgruntled employee steals your Excel sheet and just because they had access to it versus having a CRM that only certain team members can get into, right? It just protects your data. Data operations can be effective no matter the size of your organization. Of course, what gets measured gets done. Okay. And this goes without saying that any department that is using your database needs to be trained. Train folks appropriately. Train folks appropriately to use your database. Because what happens is it messes with your data integrity, right? You go in, Ashley's putting in the addresses and fully spelling out the word street. Alicia's going in and putting ST dot. People are putting Mr. and Mrs. Somebody's putting Dr., Mrs., whoever. Somebody else is putting Mrs., Doctor, who. I mean, it can get so crazy and messy. Train your team. If you are that data person, if you are the operations person, if you don't have those people and you are the only person in that department who oversees and uses your database, make sure that you are training folks. And I'll say this because it's not on any of these slides. Don't let every staff member into the database. I mean, please don't. If you have a small team, I think you can look at that a little differently, right? If you have a small team and everybody has a part in the donor stewardship process or the mailing of the letters, if you're still mailing hard copy letters, which I actually recommend, then that's a little bit different, all right? But when you have the development team and of 9 people and a staff of 27, you don't need 25 logins. I mean, it just gets to the point where it becomes unmanageable. And if you can't manage it, you can't optimize it because you have no idea what's going on. Okay. Now, of course, most databases, the majority of them come with different tiers, right? If you give somebody a login, you have your admin tiers, you have your general user, people who can edit the information, folks who can only view the information, the owner of the database, right? The person who can see the billing, can't see the billing. And I mentioned Neon earlier, and I distinctly remember that Neon being one of those that had so many different options for folks in terms of the tiers you could register them in. And that was an important thing for the organization I was with at the time. But for God's sakes, please don't just let everybody in the database with a general login. That is a recipe for utter disaster. Now, when we think about our databases from an operational standpoint, we automatically think about how we're keeping donor data, right? The donation data. But have you thought about how you're keeping your KPIs and what that could do for your team and for your organization in terms of everybody being on the same page? And so one of the biggest factors is, what does the dashboard look like? Right? We all know the EDs and CEOs, and you may be on this call right now, who are like, look, I want to log into that database and I just want to see my dashboard. I want to see what the goal is for this month, where we are, who's been asked, who hasn't been asked, and are we on track to meet the bottom line, right? Make sure it has an executive dashboard. Your CEOs and EDs don't want to get into the weeds. If you have a larger development team, right? Make sure that you have something for for the CDO, or the CDO has something. If you are that CDO, you have something for yourself. Understand the database enough so that folks can get the information that they need out of it as automatically as possible so that it becomes a tool for enabling yourselves and your organizations versus, right, a bottleneck because you don't even want to log in. God forbid, right? God forbid that the database manager is on vacation or out of town. The CEO gets a new amazing meeting opportunity and can't even pull out a report because they don't have an appropriate dashboard set up. right? You want to make sure whatever your position is, you can go in, click on those 2 to 3, maybe 5 main reports that you need for your particular role. Okay. Okay. Here are some thinking time questions for data management. Does our current database enable us to do our work, or does it hinder the progress? The third checkbox, is our data accurate? If not, what are we doing about it? What is the frequency of our data maintenance? What are you, especially for small to medium teams, what are you maintaining every week, monthly, right? Bi-monthly, yearly? There probably should be nothing you're maintaining yearly, unless if you're getting ready for a data migration or implementation phase. But staying on top of, right, your data maintenance, the process for entering donor information, which we talked about. Um, I don't get into this enough in this presentation, but do we have the necessary integrations for marketing and communications? If we have marketing and communications folks on the call today or in this meeting today, I know that is something that I've heard time and time again, right? Making sure that if you have a database with the capability of migrating or merging with your MailChimp or your Constant Contact or whatever it is that you're using, that it's accurate. A lot of what I've noticed in this, and I'll just say this and we'll move on from this, but one of the things I've noticed with a lot of database sales products is, we'll go in as a development or nonprofit folks and ask, oh, can we send donor emails through the system? That is such a yes or no question. And they say, oh, yeah, you can. When you go shopping for that database, ask how. Ask how. For everything you ask how. Can you show me? Tell them to show you the process. Because what I've come across in all these years is, yeah, it can do it, but it doesn't do it effectively. Okay. Same thing goes if you are shopping for the database and you need to, you're asking about reporting functions, right? Reporting functions are huge for everyone on this call, or we wouldn't even be on this call right now, right? Reporting functions. So when you ask, can I, can I pull out a report on donors I've talked to in the last month? And they say, oh, absolutely. You can pull out any reporting you need. Okay, fantastic. Can you show me how? Make sure they show you how. We all fall into these traps. We think it can do it, but it can't do it the way we thought it could, right? And these are very specific examples from very specific experiences that I've had. One time I asked, when I was working with a nonprofit, this was early last year, who needed a data migration. And I had the list of questions that I shared with them. But unfortunately, they weren't asking how enough, right? So they fell into the trap of, oh, yes, we can track our donor stewardship process in this database. But the problem was they could track it, but they couldn't report on it, which is insane. And the question you ask is, for example, would be, can I track XYZ function? And then ask how, and then ask, can I query it? Okay. And then ask how, or show me, right? Tell them to show you so that you can see the process, the key processes that you cannot live without from beginning to end. Because you'll find out, oh yeah, you can track everything, but you just can't report on it. And reporting is such a critical piece of all of this, okay? Especially when we're shopping for databases. All right. We have about 16 minutes left. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in the chat. I'm going to assume there are none. Yenting, are you seeing anything on your end, or have you captured any private questions?
No.
Okay.
Just a
So
lot of good feedback.
Awesome, awesome. So we'll keep going. There'll be an opportunity to ask more questions at the end. But let's get into the second part of this, and we won't spend too much time on donor communications. But the ties are so strong. between marketing and donor and development that we can't get through this webinar, right, without talking about this piece. So what is that? Donor communications. Okay. It's your ability to consistently communicate with your donors. Okay. And if we are not, again, the key word here is consistently. If we are not consistently communicating with our donors, it affects all the things we see here. Of course, your ability to raise money, right? You won't be able to steward effectively. Your ability to cultivate new donors. Well, if I'm not communicating with my current donors, how does that affect new donors? They don't know what's really going on. Well, the donors you're stewarding, and if you're stewarding at a high level, have such a potential and will want to bring new folks into your organization. So making sure that, the process is a smooth cycle of donor communication. Again, the main question I always get with this is, well, how often do we communicate? And I'm going to go back to what I've shared earlier. Your communication frequency and depth depends on your mission, and your capacity. Okay? No, you're not thanking donors monthly if you're a team of 2. I mean, it's just setting yourself up for failure. And if you are and you're automating it, it goes back to what one of our friends here shared earlier. I think it was Ashley or Alicia who shared. It becomes so automated, it becomes robotic, it's not even genuine anymore, in a nutshell, right? Measuring accurate progress on your development efforts, making sure that you have a database that can track that. Making sure your database knows when that particular donor, when you log in, and if you put in Marsha Jones, you should be able to see what part of the development process and which part of her life cycle that Marsha Jones is in. Okay, there should be some way to track that in your database. And many databases don't have that function. I will say that. But there is, or automatically, but there is a way to create it for the most part, and from what I've seen in the many that I've used. Okay. And that's a critical question to ask when you're out on the market for that. To ask, how can we create a process in this database to track the life cycle of our donors? Are they in the qualifying stage? Are they in the stewardship phase? Right? Are they in the cultivation stage? Building trusting relationships, of course, donors, CEO, board, staff, community of stakeholders. It's going to affect your ability to do that, right? I mean, I've been with organizations and have worked with organizations and have consulted with organizations who don't even think they're board members. Like, oh, they're just board members. They're right here. We talk to them all the time. They don't think that thank you would actually make an impact. Whereas that is one of the places that'll make the biggest impact. And you want your board members to be advocates for your organization, but we're not even thanking them for their donations. We got to do better than that, right? And then building a strategic communications plan. And please, my development people out there, don't build the plan without the marketing team. Just don't do that. Okay. And plainly and simply put, please leverage your marketing team. Now, if you're a team of 1 and you do marketing and communications, again, that's a little bit different, right? But feel free to reach out to colleagues that you know in the sector, maybe with organizations that are a little bit bigger than yours, right? That you can lean on to ask for advice about, well, what should be included here? I mean, there are a ton of free resources out there, right? If you're an introvert and you're thinking, I don't want to reach out to anybody, okay, fine. There are a ton of free resources out there that you can use. So leverage the resources, the human and free educational resources around you so that it's not impacting your fundraising and operations. Very, very simple here. And next week, if you attend next week, I'll share a very robust stewardship chart with you. This is just a very small snippet of the donor communications chart. But the stewardship chart gives you a breakdown of the 16 steps that nonprofits can take throughout the entire calendar year After that donation comes in, what are those 16 steps? And believe it or not, 4 or 5 of the most important steps happen within the first 7 days of that donation coming in. So we'll cover that next week. So please stay tuned to that. So this is just a small sample of what can happen and when. If you are a small to medium-sized organization or you have a very small development team, try to be consistent at least quarterly. Okay, if your team's a little bit larger, maybe you have 7 or so folks on your team, you can be consistent monthly. There has to be a way, right? And I say there has to be a way because oftentimes what we see is, oh, we can't steward our donors that often because, and the because, of course, with my recommendation, I'm looking at it from a different bird's eye view, is that there are things on the plates of these team members that just shouldn't even be there. It shouldn't even be there. Like why is Yinting, right, wasting her time doing I don't know, the graphic for next week's newsletter, and she's not even on the marketing team. Like how, and this comes in, when we talk about organizational and team alignment, we'll see some of this. But the December Impact newsletter here, for example, the event or the campaign. I understand that you may be good with Canva. However, your time should not be spent designing the newsletter. If you have the marketing team, leverage those talents. Leverage those talents, okay? I'm holding in my laugh here a little bit too, just so we can get through this. Here are your thinking time donor communications questions. You have to be able to answer these questions, okay? You have to. And I share these questions in transparency because when I was in the space, a lot of these questions earlier in my career, I couldn't answer. I couldn't answer. But when I was able to answer them, and when my team members were able to answer them a little later in my career when I had a team, it all started clicking together and making sense, more sense, right? You weren't being reactive. You were being more proactive in the ways in which you were operating your development shop. So again, you'll get these. We won't go through them. But I think if you ask me to pick just one thing here that I would love to highlight would be the fourth checkbox. Do we have a process for tracking donor communication efforts? What is that process for tracking? No matter how simple, you need to have a process and it needs to be documented. And everyone involved in that process needs to understand the process. So yes, that's development team. That is the marketing team who's probably designing some of those assets. That's the CEO who's probably, right, responsible for reaching out to some of those donors to thank them. That's the board if they're involved in your stewardship and cultivation. So making sure that you're mapping who needs to be involved in that process. That is critical, okay? All right, looks like we have a couple of questions here. I'm going to save these questions for the end just so we can get through the rest of the slides that we have here. But I do see your questions, and I promise I will email you if we don't get to them. Okay. Organizational alignment. Whew, this is a big one. We try to truncate it down to just a couple of slides, but a few slides, but let me tell you. So, and I'll be transparent. I don't think this is the best graphic to represent organizational alignment, and you'll see so many of them out there. My goal here was to map this out in a way where we understood sort of, who had the main source of responsibility. In this case, it's development, right? We're talking about development operations. But who needs to be in on that conversation the most and second? That's marketing, right? Then we have programs, who is also, I'm sorry, a forgotten child when it comes to development operations, especially if you're working in a space where your program sequencing is where your development operations and functions are highly, highly dependent on the sequencing of your programs. So I think one of the spaces that immediately comes to mind with this are museums and education organizations, right? For education, there might be some activation activities or events that need to happen before the school year kicks off. Maybe you're having a back to school drive or whatever it is, but something's need to happen there. Donor stewardship needs to be at a high towards the end of the summer. Whereas for some other organizations, it's like, yeah, donors are not very active, right? They're taking a lot of time off. We don't really bother them too much during the summer. Again, it depends on your mission. Okay. I'm one of those, I steward and cultivate folks year round. To me, there is no month off because you just never know. And when I think about summers, I'm thinking, hey, people are more relaxed, they're on vacation. Maybe they might entertain a call. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see I put a post out about the title of the post was "We don't call donors on weekends. Why not?" Right? So it just depends. Again, it depends. It depends on you as a person, depends on your organization, your capacity, and all those other things. But just keep in mind when it comes to the alignment piece, who needs to be involved. So you look at this and be like, oh, okay, everybody. No, but there's some people missing here still. The board is missing. How much do they need to be aligned, right? To the things that are happening from an operational standpoint within your department. But I am a firm believer that your internal team members need to be in the know before board members. Firm believer in that. Okay. The last thing I would want if I was a development team member, or excuse me, if I was a marketing team member, is a board member calling me saying, oh, well, development told me you were going to be making a marketing kit. But marketing doesn't even know that because I didn't have the meeting with them yet. So don't announce things. Okay. Don't assign things to other people during the board meetings and other departments before they know about them. Right. So making sure you have that internal communication team alignment before you're sharing things. And again, with external boards to me are kind of in that middle part. They're part of the organization, right? But they're not on the team. They're part of the team, but they're not on the team, if that makes sense. So making sure you're keeping that information streamlined. Again, of course, we have a whole organizational alignment class that we teach. I won't even go through this slide. I think a lot of the things I just talked about are mentioned here, but this just sort of maps it out for you, what it could look like. Okay. And then we're going to end here with our thinking time questions on organizational alignment with 4 very basic questions. And I think the first one that focuses on collaboration and inclusivity in how you are approaching other organizations and how you're approaching your operations is key. Okay, I think that one question relates to all the others. You have to be inclusive. You can't be the CDO and have a team of 5 and give them the rules. Your team has to be a part of the rulemaking. They have to be a part of the processes and the functions in creating those things. So I think that's a really key thing that we often forget about, right, in our roles here. We have 30 seconds left. If you would be interested in a deeper dive in some of these topics, we have a class coming up called Fundraising with Confidence, and it covers operations, it covers donor stewardship, and it covers donor cultivation as well. That class is coming up. We are still working out some details, but you can feel free to join the wait list by scanning the QR code you see on your screen, and I will be sending out some information about that to you shortly if you go ahead and just join the wait list. And I'm going to stop here. Yinting, I'm going to grab questions from the chat as well so I can email folks.
Perfect. That's great. I think there was just one question we missed, so we can include that certainly in the follow-up email. But if there are other questions, please go ahead and drop it in the chat right now. So to close things out, thank you, Whitney. That was amazing. Such great information, a lot of good advice and guidance. We are so lucky to have you again next week. For part 2, it will be on Thursday, same time, 12 to 1. Hope to see all of you there. Please do expect that follow-up email from me by tomorrow. It'll include the link to the recording, as well as that one pager everyone seems to be really excited about, and a copy of the slide deck. If there are additional questions that you would like Whitney to go over in the next session, please go ahead and reply to that email. I'll gather those up and certainly will share it with Whitney before the next session.
And Nancy,
Um,
I will send you the link as well for the wait list for
Perfect.
people who want to join. I see Tara's having some trouble there, so there might be other folks. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Yes, if you want slides for next week and if you can't make it, just reply to the email, let me know, and I'll be sure to make sure that you're on that list for the following week. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend and hope to see all of you next week. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.